Warning: the podcast you're about to hear is purely for entertainment purposes. The content shared is not a form of advice, and applying any of the information in real life is done solely at your own risk. The individuals featured in this episode take no responsibility for the consequences of using these materials in practice. If that's a problem for you, feel free to skip it, although you'll probably regret it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in another English One podcast. Today's guest is a man who I am not gonna lie. I've firstly find you watching the Transparent podcast, to be honest, because I've known Andy for a while and I follow him, but I don't really know who was his coach. So this is why I've never heard about you before. But since that podcast, I find very interesting with all of the details that you pinpointed. So I've immediately just started to follow you, and then just shoot you the private message if you'll be willing to hop up on my podcast to explain what are like you manage everything. Like all of my watchers probably know what we're gonna do here today. But first of all, I'm gonna trying to tell how like your name and surname is gonna be up. Prabh Dhaliwal, if I'm correct. I am correct.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I've hit like 6 or 7 times the repeat button on the Transparent to try to learn it because that was really hard for me.
100%. Well, first and foremost, man, I appreciate you having me on. A lot of people don't know me. Even though I was coaching Andy, a couple of high-level bodybuilders. I'm very quiet. I like to stay in the background a little bit, let my guys take a lot of the credit because obviously they put in a lot of the hard work, time, effort, and energy to, win these accolades. So my goal as a coach was never to be on the front pages, to be in the limelight. I like my athletes to get that. I just enjoy, to coach these guys and get them to where they need to go.
Yeah, like I believe it should be, because
Yeah, for
at
sure.
the end of the day, like the client is what we are live for, to be honest, and their success.
And that's what the
So
fans live for as well, right? Like obviously they like hearing about protocols, all that good stuff, but the fans obviously like to enjoy watching the athlete go on stage, compete. Like, let's be real, like, as a coach, they're not too worried about who's coaching them. We care about the end product that ends up on stage and how competitive it looks.
this is not like normal for this podcast, but I would really love to hear like your beginnings. How do you started to coach? If you compete yourself, and how do you really like find it's like curious that curious you to the point that you wanted to do it like for a living,
So
basically.
first, man, when I first started my bodybuilding journey, I was about 20 years old. One of my buddies actually came to me in the gym, one of my good friends, and he was like, "Hey, man, like you have a good shape and structure. You should compete." And he was like, "You should do the men's physique division." And I knew nothing about this at the time. I was in school. So when I started competing, my number one objective, to be honest with you, was just to build a business out of it. In terms of coaching, because that's kind of what I was fascinated by. PEDs, food, specific athletes, how to get them to their absolute best potential. So I started coaching about 8 years ago. At the time when I was coaching, obviously, you don't have a lot of clients. I was working 3 jobs. I was working at a retail store. I was managing a couple supplement stores, and then I was coaching at the same time. Um, and then, I just started coaching a lot of the local athletes around town, started to develop a knowledge for it, started to pick people's brains. I don't know if you know Kuba Sheehan. I
Yeah,
worked
of
with him
course.
I worked with him as a coach for a little bit actually. And that gave me a very just different perspective on coaching, because I feel like American side of bodybuilding is very different from European on methodologies, training expertise. It's very different. Obviously, I feel like it's all getting intertwined now because social media is more prevalent, YouTube's more prevalent. So we're taking information from different places. But I worked with a couple of high-level coaches myself. I've competed. I've been to the national stage 4 times. I've been third twice. I've been fourth once and then fifth once in men's physique. So I've been close to my pro card. But honestly, man, My goal was to never really prolong my bodybuilding career. It was just to, like I said, build a business off of this, to become the best coach in the world is what I kind of want to do now. And that's why I'm actively no longer competing currently. Just because, when you are prepping yourself and then you have these high level athletes competing, I think these athletes deserve all the time and attention in the world because they have prize money on the line, Olympia qualifications. This is their livelihood. So I don't want my bodybuilding to ever take away from their journey.
Yeah, totally understand that. Okay, so let's say that hearing that all the information out from you, I've decided to work with you. So let's say that I am currently like weighing like around 102 kilos, like end of the heavyweight class, and we wanted to jump me over the weight class to go open. The
Yeah.
next season, I'm gonna step in on a stage. So let's say that I'm finished my competing season right now, and I'm done myself like 4 weeks or 6 weeks of health
Yep.
phase and whatever those guys like to call it. But basically, my all of my labs are pitch perfect. Like
Perfect.
I am currently on 300 grams of protein, like 400 grams of carbs, and around 50 grams of fats on training days. And non-training days, everything stays the same. By the carbs go down to 300s. I'm doing like 5 times a week, like 20 minutes of cardio, and on average, like
Yep.
12K of steps daily. And I'm training uh, 5 times a week, like push pull,
Yep.
legs, rest, push pull. And because I'm focusing on my chest, on my back, and a little bit on my hamstrings. That's like my focus
Of course.
right now. And you obviously probably gonna set a new pair of goals for myself, especially that right now I probably need to get bigger everywhere because we are jumping
Yep.
the weight class. So how do you manage everything from this point, and what would be the first thing that you would wanted to know or take out of me to start the journey together?
So the main thing I'm looking for is a couple different variables here. Number one, how is your appetite? If your appetite's still very high, that's great. That's putting us in a phenomenal position to push food up and to continue to grow. The second thing I want to look at is what is our total volume acclimation across the board? How much volume are we doing training wise? What are our strongest body parts? Can we take away some volume from those body parts and add it to other body parts to get those body parts to grow more effectively? Because, for example, if you're a guy and you're trying to bring up your back, your chest, and your hamstrings, I'm guessing that means your quads are pretty strong. That means we could probably pull some sets away from your quads in order to balance out your physique. Because in bodybuilding, a lot of guys get so focused on muscular tissue, getting bigger, getting bigger. But when you have great balance and symmetry across the board, it only accentuates your physique more. So those are the things I'm looking at. Appetite, what is your training volume? Once we add in PEDs, the number one thing that means is your recovery rate's going to go up. Therefore, we can start adding more sets if the body allows. Now it's about collecting biofeedback week by week. Okay, how is your hamstring soreness, recovery going into that second hamstring session? Hey, coach, I feel great. That means we have a little bit more push to be able to get some more sets to that area. Okay, how's your chest recovery? And then, high level athletes, I do recommend always to send training videos. Let's see what your training looks like. Are we really utilizing the muscle group that we want to grow, or is something else taking over because we're training either too heavy, we're not using proper mechanics? And then from a PED standpoint, the off season, man, I like the number one thing I say about my coaching is I like to work in a collaborative effort with the athlete. It's not a dictatorship with me. I want to hear them. I want to understand their feedback. Obviously, you as an athlete and many other athletes, you guys have a good understanding of what compounds work with you, how you feel on them. So, number one thing I'll ask that athlete is what compounds have you taken before? What has worked well? What compounds have you felt like, you don't feel good on? Some guys will say they get anxiety on EQ. My job as a coach then is to not include that in the plan. It's not like well, I believe only in EQ, so we're only going to use that. And then in the off season, I think it's all about total milligram dosage, in my opinion. It's about totality of the gear.
Let's hold on about the gear and all the stuff. So let's say that for the reference, just to you to know, right now I'm on true like TRT, like 175 mgs of test only. Now, like five I use GH or
Yep.
something like that, and my total volume is around 85 sets.
Yep.
And let's say it's spread equally because
Okay.
I'm just divided like my back and my push into
Yep.
2 days, and a little bit higher volume on the legs because they
Yep.
are just trained once a week.
Yep.
And obviously, my strongest parts are arms and legs, like quads,
Okay.
because I need some hamstrings.
Yep.
So, would you just leave the my current split as it is, or would you like to just check it out and see what we can make a little bit better, or maybe tweak
No, yeah.
something? How do you just assess my training? So the first question will be how you set up a training during the off season, focusing
Okay.
more on volume, intensity, or splitting into a cycle during the whole off season.
Yep. So the first thing is I would look at what is your weakest body part. That would be on the first day of the week. Because when you're going into a new week, that's when you're the freshest. So just say your back is your weakest body part, then the first day is going to be a pull day. On that pull day, I'll probably have some back in there and also some hamstrings in there. Because we can add in an SLDL there, just to get some more work through the hamstring and posterior chain, to overall thicken up that whole area. And then the second day we'd go to is a push day. On the push day, the first day on that pull day, we'll probably do no biceps. I know a lot of people do pull with some biceps. I'll probably just do pull, just straight back and hamstrings. The second day, which is your push day, I'll probably do chest as your primary, maybe a delt movement, depending on how your delts look. And then we'll actually throw in arms on that day. The third day will be a rest day. The fourth day we'll go to legs, but it just depends. I got to see what the quads look like. If they are very developed compared to the rest of the body, you know, I've had guys completely pull quad training out and just do like maybe 5 sets total, some leg extensions, maybe, a Bulgarian split squat for knee flexion or a lunge for some knee flexion, and then that's it for quads because that stimulus is enough just to keep them where they're currently at in terms of the muscularity. So if we don't need that quad day, then we go back into a pull again and a push again, and then an off day again. We would just kind of repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, until we bring up the body parts. Just say now the back starts catching up. The back starts looking a lot better, a lot more dominant. Now I'll actually revert and put chest at the beginning of the week. So now we'll start the week with push days as the back is already coming up because chest was the next movement we needed to focus on. So that's kind of how I'll structure the training, but it's so dependent, man, on the client, right? Like, for example, I'd have to see the physique to know what is happening with it. My main thing is obviously, I think even in an off season, it's hard to bring up 3 body parts at once. In my opinion, it's hard to bring up your chest, your back, your hamstrings indirectly with back. I think you could bring those up at the same time, your back and your hamstrings. But bringing up back, chest, and hamstrings at the same time, it's going to be difficult to an extent, unless you are somebody who responds very well from a recovery side of things, and also from the side of things of understanding training mechanics, understanding, giving good feedback to me on your performance, how things are rising. Because uh, with specific things like back, especially when you can't see that muscle group being trained, it comes down to feel, contraction. Those things are very important.
Yeah.
But then with an athlete, it's about finding the fine line. Where can I push the weight up, but still feel it enough? Some guys will just row and they have 20-inch biceps. That's not what we want. But some guys will make it so slow and controlled where now you have no growth from that muscle group. So it's about finding that balance as an athlete as well.
Okay, I get it. Just one question about that. So how long would you stay on one muscle group to see like rational progress? Because we both know like some guys like to do like 6 weeks or something like that, and that's probably not enough to even see that difference, to be honest.
So well, for example, if we're going to that first off season with you're on TRT at the current moment, you got your bloods, everything's perfect. I would run a training program for about 16 to 18 weeks, just rinsing and repeating. But it's all about feedback, on that client. For example, just say this client is training in a manner of progressive overloading the movements. The number one thing I'll ask that athlete is, within time, what movements are stalling, because there's different movements that you could get a lot out of. For example, just say you're doing an upper back. People love the new Mega Mass T-bar row. That's just a popular equipment that's just came out and people are dying for it. But the main thing I would tell every athlete is, tell me when that movement starts stalling. Because then we could switch that for a different upper back bias movement if that's what we are using the movement for. I don't mind switching out movements for things once they start stalling because I don't want to keep trying to hammer a movement once it's stalled out. For example, if you're doing an incline dumbbell press and it starts stalling, I'm not going to just say keep doing that for 6 weeks. No, let's switch to an incline Smith machine. Let's switch to a hammer strength incline you press. Let's switch to a prime incline press. So we could get the most out of these movements in different pathways, different patterns, while still maintaining the same body part we're trying to bring up.
Okay, great. So how about the off-season diet? Do you prefer to keep me as lean as possible, but while still growing, or knowing that I probably need to get much heavier to just like yield those progress that we wanted to do to make during this off season? You like to keep me like just for like safety reasons, like because like those small like tiny bit like surpluses might be difficult, especially for guys who are just doing a lot of like manual works and stuffs like that
Yep,
during the day. So sometimes it might not even be a surplus.
of
So
course.
for that reason, maybe you like to push food to the limits. So basically, do you like to keep me very, very lean during the space, or push it as much as I possibly can eat? And how do you manage it?
So the main thing for me is number one thing is the client still insulin sensitive. Are they able to partition nutrients properly? Are they able to absorb carbohydrates and use them as glycogen for training performance, for fullness, pumps, all that good stuff? So every client is different. For somebody like yourself, just say you're 224, coming off stage and you're still really lean and you're trying to push into the next class. I don't necessarily, everybody's so different. I would have to find for that client what is the best set body fat that they grow from. Some guys grow, we'll use a theoretical example. Some guys grow great at 10% body fat. Some guys grow phenomenally at 15% body fat. Some guys grow great at 17% body fat. Some guys need to be a little bit heavier in the off season, a little bit, thicker, denser. As long as their insulin sensitivity is good and they're still partitioning nutrients well, I am okay with guys getting bigger. But if you want the truth, what I've realized, obviously people know Andy as my best athlete. For his first off season ever, with me, he got up to 265 and he dieted back down to 212 pounds on stage. Every off season after that, the off season after that, we got to about 247, I believe, and it actually yielded more tissue growth by only getting him to 247 than we got up to that 262. Because I think when you get too heavy, a little bit too soft, what happens is you start to diet off muscle during a prep phase. I think when you stay very insulin sensitive, and you don't necessarily get too heavy for your specific body, I think there's a lot of tissue we end up holding on to that we forgot was even there. Same thing with him this offseason. The heaviest he got was 258. And my prediction is he's going to add about 10 more pounds of stage tissue this year and he'll be at his cap. So I prefer to keep guys leaner. That doesn't mean I want you stage lean all year, but that means lean enough to be able to have good insulin sensitivity, partition nutrients, um, and all of that good stuff. So it kind of just depends on the body type. But I want you at a set point where we are growing, but not just sloppy fat, because I think that's just a waste.
Yeah, and I do believe that I know that people don't realize how much fitness they have a huge role in overall muscle gain, because if you cannot perform the same because you're heavy, you're just breathing like doing 5 reps and need to rest 10 minutes or something like that, you've just wasting your time at the gym. And I do believe that staying a little bit, especially for heavy guys like open bodybuilders and heavy classes, because those guys are basically just struggling walking around and puts like unnecessary 20, 30, 50 pounds of water weight and just fat on them, and they are just useless.
Yep. And that's the main thing with training as well, right? Like we were talking about training earlier. The main thing for me is even with training, like having these guys train in different rep ranges, shorter rep ranges, 6 to 9s, 10 to 14s, and even going up to the 16 to 19 range, training in three different rep ranges for hypertrophy, from a cardiovascular standpoint as well, to ensure that these guys could, throughout their whole off season, are able to train in different capacities, that's very important for me to ensure that they stay as fit and as healthy as possible from a cardiovascular side of things as well. I don't think it's ever smart as a bodybuilder to get super heavy to, sit
Mm.
around all day, because that's going to impair your training performance, impair your health, because those things are going to be vital factors in ensuring that you have a long career as well, in the bodybuilding space.
Yeah, definitely. I've been there. I've
Yeah,
been
for
there,
sure.
and I've been in a place that my injection fraction goes so low that I need to stop, like
Yep.
stop for a while with the off season, like come off the gear and stuff like that, because that was like really literally concern, and it was all because unnecessary weight on
Yeah, for
myself,
sure,
and
man.
that was
Even
just stupid.
even for every client, it's so different, right? Like I have a client right now. He joined up with me. He was about 270 pounds. He's an amateur open bodybuilder, phenomenal potential. But the number one thing he told me was, I'm joining on, he joined on. The first thing I did was I dropped him to TRT. The reason I did so is because he has edema in his legs after he works shifts. And I personally believe, that is unhealthy and unsafe. So I was like, number one thing we need to do, even though you're pretty lean right now, is start dropping off some body fat levels to get those issues to go away. Once all those issues go away, and then we get your blood work back, if everything looks perfect and we're all set go, the main thing is keeping you as healthy as possible while ensuring you continue to progress. That doesn't mean we need to get up to 290, 300 pounds. The main thing is, do we see quality tissue growing? Do we see body parts coming up? Do we see roundness, fullness, muscularity, better conditioning in certain areas? Because a lot of guys, I feel like, get stuck on the weight. They get stuck on a number in the scale, and a lot of guys forget the yes, I know I understand you need mass and open bodybuilding, even in classic physique. Um, but the main thing is, are you putting on quality tissue is what guys need to really start looking at. Are we looking at a physique and seeing progress, or are we just getting fatter? And that's where it comes down to being honest with yourself of, okay, I might not be my heaviest ever in an off season, but I've definitely made a tremendous amount of progress. And the judges are never going to ask you, hey man, how much do you weigh? All they care, like last year, Andy competed in classic physique. He won 3 shows in a row. He was 10 pounds under the cap. I guarantee most of those guys at the
Yeah.
classic physique division were at the cap. But a lot of these guys, I feel like at times even sacrifice conditioning because they're so worried about the number. Like, I need to be at the cap. I need to be bigger. I need to be bigger. Bigger doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, always mean better.
Yeah, especially on the classic physique guys.
100%. Well, even open
Definitely.
bodybuilding, right? Like we look at, open bodybuilding, and this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but I look
Yeah.
at some of these guys, and it's not always the biggest guy who wins. Like
Come
I
on.
have
Come on. Sean Clarita. Come on.
exactly, man. Like it's crazy. He's beating open guys who are 100 pounds heavier than him because
Yeah,
of what?
Martin beats Samson just recently.
Exactly, man. Yeah, at the
So come
at the
on.
Prague, So it's so crazy it's because these guys don't realize how much balance, symmetry, conditioning, shape, structure, all that stuff will carry. I think a lot of these guys push the envelope so hard to get bigger, 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 which is okay. But at some point, if you start sacrificing your waistline, you start sacrificing other parts that accentuate your physique, you're only hurting yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So for the next set of questions, I need to just assess something, because different coaches counted the macros different ways. So
Yep.
how do you count your macros? From every source, like even trace fats, trace
Yep.
carbs and stuff like that? Or do you just count like chicken as a protein, like oats as a carbs, and don't care about the trace shit?
So I count it as everything. When I write out the plan for the individual, when just for example, I send a PDF to the client, and at the bottom it'll say their macros. I write it out as everything, but I'm focused only on what is solely a carbohydrate, what is solely a protein source, and what is solely a fat source. That is in my head how I'm calculating it. Like, for example, this individual's 240 pounds on stage. I need X amount of protein from quality protein sources. Like, I'm not talking about I need protein from the oats, from the bagels, from the rice cakes. Like, I want protein from eggs, chicken, beef, shrimp, tilapia, whatever the case may be. I want
Got it.
whole protein sources. Yes, sir.
Get it. So the next question will be about the protein. So how much protein for like kilo or pounds of lean mass you like to keep your open competitors?
So I'm actually a proponent of lower protein doses. And I'm not going to say low. For example, if I have a guy who's 250 pounds on stage, which in kilos is 113 kilos. The main thing that I'm gonna say is I probably want that individual protein wise. Let me see, at about 305 grams of protein, about 50 grams above their lean body mass. I'm talking about lean body mass. When I'm calculating protein, is the main thing because that's obviously tissue you're really holding. So I'm not a proponent of a huge amount of protein. In my plans, I'm always 50 to 70 grams over their lean body mass.
So it's gonna be around probably 3 grams per kilo, like just to be safe.
Yeah, I would say about, yep, that would make sense because if he was 113 pounds, Um, a little
Yeah,
bit less probably. Honestly, it is probably about 2.8.
2.8.
Yeah, yeah. For me specifically with my clients, because the number one thing I want to maintain for a lot of these guys is a small waist, good digestion, and protein at times can start to cause some bloat, some issues. I'm also a proponent of which we'll go into fats and stuff. So yeah, protein wise, I like to just keep it around there.
So as you just started to tell about the fats, so
Yeah.
please share your opinion about the fats and carbs as well.
So I'm actually a low fat guy. Main proponent of that is I want to see you guys cycling through food pretty quickly. Of course, I will use fats as a stopgap at some point. But the main thing is, just say, for example, we'll use you again as 224 pounds off stage. First thing, get you on 260 grams of protein. Let's get you on, just say we were already reversing you out of the show and your peak week, your carbs baseline were 310, put you on about 450 carbohydrates, and then let's put you at 45 fats. Nothing crazy. Number one thing I'll start building up in the off season is carbohydrates. Yep.
Just one question, because you've told about the protein that you have in your head, just
Yep.
the like just the
Yep.
protein that says.
Yep.
So what about the fats? You mean 45 grams of added fats or total?
Total fats. But when I'm talking about fats, I'm talking about from sources such as, whole eggs,
Okay.
nut butters, avocado,
So
and then you
it's
could use oils.
probably gonna be around 60 to even 70, counting like omega
With
3s and stuff like that.
Yep, counting everything, it's probably gonna bump up to about, yeah, 55, 60 grams in totality.
Okay. Okay,
Yep.
great. Great. So just continue, please. I just
Yeah.
wanted to
No, no, you're
just
good.
to
You're good. Yeah.
clear that
So,
out because
so then the main thing I'll start doing is I'll start increasing carbohydrates because what's the number one thing that these guys need post show? Their satiation, their ghrelin and leptin are off, so they're hungry. I'll start increasing carbohydrates. I like to use a variety of carbohydrate sources, rice, potatoes, cream of rice, oats, bagels, rice cakes, sourdough bread. Give guys a variety of big palate. I love to use fruits from a micronutrient standpoint. So I have a lot of fruit in my diets. I know a lot of old school coaches, stick to the basics. But my thing is I like to give a lot of variety because when you do get into, contest prep, show weeks, peak weeks, I like to have the digestive tract to have a lot of food that it's been used to eating. Therefore we can keep stomach volume low, keep the athletes, let's be real, man. I know some bodybuilders are very militant. Nobody wants to eat 500 grams of rice a meal. Like it's not fun, like that's not enjoyable in my opinion. Um, so the max amount of rice I'll really go to per meal, even in the off season, is like 300 grams, and then give some other sources alongside that to still, have a good carbohydrate balance in there. But yeah, I'll start increasing carbs first, and then as I start to see musculature come up, the tissue grow, then I'll start to add some protein in as well, because we do need more protein there to ensure that the tissue is going to continue to grow. And then from there, fats, once I start to see carbohydrates at about 600 to 650, now I'll start adding in the fats to slow some things down with digestion, to ensure we continue to grow. Not obviously to the point where the fat sources don't sit well with them, but that's when I'll start to add them.
Yeah. Sorry that I'm writing down some
No
things
worries.
here, but just start to just the new questions popping up to my head,
Yep.
and I would really love for you to ask about like, can you explain or can you just tell me the example of meal plan you would set up for me. Obviously, it's gonna be just made up out of your head, but I would just wanted to see how you structure it because it's really important to for those people who maybe cannot structure it properly because we all know the guys who are eating just the rice,
Yep.
just the chicken, maybe some piece of broccoli, and that's it.
Of course.
And there could be a many ways of screwing up your diet. So that's the first question, and the second question would be, could you tell me how many meals would you like me to have on a daily? Like, probably it's gonna base on my like day structure because if I wake up
Exactly.
early, probably it's gonna be a little bit more. But
Yep.
like your perfect amount, like in your opinion, it's better to eat more meals, like more smaller meals,
Yep.
or maybe like just fewer meals but a bigger one just to spread it out a little bit wider
Yep.
between them, like more breaks between the because I've asking for the digestion and keeping your waist tight sake.
Yep. So the main thing I would say with that, is a example of a meal plan. Let's see. I'm gonna send you a request for sharing just to make this easier for the viewer to see.
Yeah,
Because
great.
I don't mind just sharing it. So this is actually what Andy ate in his off season, when he was maxed out. We have some whole eggs here. We have a lean protein
Oh,
source in the morning. We have
I
some
can
oat.
I we can see it. I don't know why, but it was not pop up.
Give me 1 second. Let me see here. Let me do share screen. Can you see it now?
Yep,
Yep.
great.
So here we have his meal plan in the off season while he was maxed out. He has one free meal a week, which he'll have once a week. He'll replace his last two meals with it, just for some mental, sanity. From there, within that, we have meal one. It's a 6 meal plan. Obviously, there, like you said, it is no small meals here, right? Because if you're eating 900 grams of carbohydrates, like you're
Mm.
not going to be eating a small amount of food. This is kind of how I'll structure it. Eggs in the morning, a lean protein source. From there, we have oats, you have alternatives to eat. You have some fruit in there, you have sourdough bread, pre-training meal, cream of rice, rice cakes, isolate, all of that good stuff. Um, Meal three, we have some rice. Like I said, I don't really like to go over 300 grams of rice here. A couple pieces of sourdough bread, rice cakes, and pineapple. So a lot of sources there. Rice cakes, sourdough, pineapple again with the fattier meat source towards the nighttime. Same thing here, rice cakes, fruit. Here I won't put a specification on fruit because my thing he's already in a surplus, at this point, even if the fruit, just say some fruit has 10 carbs, some has 20, it's not
Yeah.
really going to be different. He's in a surplus no matter what. Rather have him just choose a fruit source that he enjoys eating. And then same thing at the last meal, he'll have cream of rice, rice cakes, isolate. And this is kind of catered to him, the foods he really enjoys doing, what he enjoys eating. And then, for a non-training day diet, here, much less carbohydrates as you can see, where
Yeah.
we pull down because we don't need that food volume there. I actually use non-train days as to re-stimulate appetite. Let's drop him down a little bit for a day. Sure, he might lose a pound or two, but by the time he has 4 training days in a row, that weight's going to shoot back up. And this probably still means he's not in a deficit here. And the heaviest he really got in the off season was 258, and that just shows you how low I really keep protein, 280 grams. I don't think you need a ton, especially when you're on PEDs. You should be growing there. But yeah, that's kind of how I structure that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I love to see that, and you've answered basically the next question, which you divided into a training or no training days. But
Yep.
I wanted to show that because there is a lot of guys who are just not thinking about the things like fruits, like vegetables, like eating some sort of soluble and non-soluble fiber, and those are for me right now, I do believe that this is more important than any of your health supplements. There, forget about your, I don't know, like citrus bergamos
Yep.
and red yeast rice and omega threes even. If you are not eating enough the good nutrients, like fiber that clears out your cholesterol, like clears out your estrogen, to be honest, to not recirculate it from your gut and stuff like that, you are not gonna be do anything with your magic pills, like
For
popping
sure.
up 40 pills a day and eating like rice and broccoli. This is why I wanted you to share this. How do you structure it? And I love it. What I see out there. So that's perfect. And I saw one thing I saw, because this is like typical for American coaches, like counting out the protein after cooking. And just to share a little bit story, I was coached by Dominic Mutasio,
Okay.
and we still like in a good touch. I'm still
Of course.
consulting with him. He's mentoring me a little bit with coaching my wife and stuff like that.
Okay.
But other than that, like he prepped me, and believe it or not, he told me to eat. I don't really remember how much it was, like 200, 250 grams of rice, something like that.
Yeah.
And me not know how it really works out there
Yeah. You were
in
doing you were doing raw weight.
no, worse. I would divide it in a rice cooker with so much water
Oh, okay.
that I was eating like raw weight, maybe 15 grams, like
Oh,
maybe
damn.
up to maximum 20 grams of raw
Oh, damn.
rice. And Dominic just starting to ask me what the heck, like
Yeah.
giving me a burgers and stuff like that, because
Yeah.
I was eating like
Stop
almost
it, mate.
nothing.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted to ask you, do you have some sort of problems with that? Because I do believe that is so inaccurate, like
Yep.
counting the after cook, because you would need to tell your client for how long he needs to cook it, when he
Yep.
needs to turn off the rice cooker, because I've even saw on my rice, if I make it and leave it,
Yep.
if I weigh it right away, it's weighed, for example,
A little bit.
2,000 grams, and I waited for half an hour or an hour, and it's 1,500, not
100%.
2,000. Yeah, so this is so inaccurate. How do you really
So,
manage it?
so honestly, man, the main thing with American bodybuilders that I've realized is they're very much so creatures of habit. And when I say that, these guys end up cooking their food the same every single time. So I've honestly personally never ran into issues with it. But the one thing with my coaching is the reason I don't run into a lot of issues with it is because once these guys, for example, when you're in the off season, man, you're in a surplus no matter what. So you're getting the protein and the carbs. I think the main issue becomes when you're on prep, that would be an issue. But me and my guys are checking in so frequently on prep. Sometimes, like for example, Andy did his reverse diet with me after the Olympia. He checked in every single day for 18 weeks straight. Like, so there really is no variability or loss there, because if I see a change the next day, I'll just ask him like, yo, what's going on? Why did this happen? Where was the drop? Okay, what changed? Okay, I changed this with my chicken. Okay, cool. Then that means we have to add a couple ounces to it or whatever the case may be. So I'm always shifting the plan if needed, depending on what's happening. Same thing with prep, if I have an athlete and I start to notice some change in his physique, starts to get really flat, or starts to seem like, bro, he's burning through food. I'll just ask him, what's going on? What changed this week? Okay, that's what changed. Clearly, there's a variability loss there. Now I can make adjustments. It's funny you say that because I actually just had a client today. Um, a young kid, lots of potential as well. Hasn't competed in a couple years, and he doesn't do cardio because his job is so strenuous and hard. And we started to see some variability change. So the first thing I did was let me just bump up some food. Even though we might have some variability change there, it's like that bump should just put us back to where we need to be. So you could always shift the plan, change the plan. But I personally have never really ran into an issue with cooked or raw weight. But I also give my athletes an option. If people want to weigh their proteins all raw, I'm all for it. I personally, actually, when I worked with Kubashi, and I used to do that myself, weigh everything raw, but I also have the time and the ability to do so because, I don't have to meal prep. I work from home, so I could go downstairs, make a meal. Some people are, at an office job all day, so then they'll have to, weigh everything out raw, cook it for that day or 2 days, and then split it up. And honestly, for Americans, man, that might be, like some of these guys start messing up the calculations, or they'll start asking me, like, how do I calculate that? Obviously, it seems simple in hindsight, but it just adds more stress to their plate. So that's why for me, I just let them choose raw weight, cooked weight, and if there is some variability, I could make adjustments.
Great, great. So, being on that topic, what are the biggest diet mistakes that you've seen out from your experience with those clients? And I'm asking about like probably more of that experienced ones because those beginners may do like silly ones, but
You put
those like experienced ones sometimes can really shock you with some decisions they made. So, what are the biggest thing that you believe ruining the off seasons for experienced guys, diet
I think
wise?
the biggest thing I see guys ruin their off season is before it even starts, man. If you don't nail that reverse phase, the off season is dead in the water. There, in my opinion, now you're backtracking and you've gained too much body fat off the rip. Your metabolic rate is messed up. Your leptin and ghrelin are still tanked, and that's where it becomes already you don't even have an off season because these guys have ruined it before it's began. That's why I'm such a huge proponent of nail that reverse. If you can nail that reverse, you set yourself up for a crazy good window to grow and to make progress and to ensure that you grow. But guys who don't, guys who mess up their reverse, typically I'll have them actually start dieting back down and then go into an off season because if you're really heavy and you have a lot of water on your frame and a lot of body fat, what's the point of growing from there? Because you're not insulin sensitive anymore. Your body's not going to partition nutrients well. But in the off season, the main thing that I see guys really mess up on for experience, even guys, is missing meals. And the second thing is not drinking their water. If you don't have fluids in, and you're not constantly flushing, and your body gets into that state where, you miss a meal here and there, you miss a meal every 3 days, it just sets you back because now your appetite starts to decline with no fluids in and not getting enough water in, your appetite also starts to decline. So that's the main thing I see is just guys not being on top of things in the off season, even the higher level guys of missing meals, not getting their water intake in, and all that good stuff.
Okay. So, how about the cheat meals in the off season? Do you allow your clients for some, or do you don't think that the off season are the best time for cheat meals?
I give everybody a cheat meal in the off season. Um, some clients, like the main thing for me is before getting into an off season, as we discussed, if a client is coming out of a show, every client usually ends up eating after the show. They bump up 8 to 10 pounds. Number one objective is get that weight back down to baseline where you were at your low of prep, whether we have to dig for 4 more days to get there, and then, start creating that onset of increasing food. But the main thing with every client is at some point they will have one cheat meal a week, replacing their last two meals. I'm not somebody who even calorie manages it. The reason I don't calorie manage it, like some coaches will be like, have 50 fats, 50 carbs and 30 grams of protein in that cheat meal. That's your macros for it. I don't like to do that because I think it creates a really bad relationship with food for a lot of these people, especially with bodybuilding, especially in the female realm where you start putting numbers on it and calculations on it. Mentally, it's a huge stressful experience. Some clients you can't give them a cheat meal right out the gate when they start reversing just because, some guys like to eat big cheat meals. So I like to
Yeah.
just They keep it out. I'll even tell some guys like, look, dude, we're not gonna add in a cheat meal here, but we're gonna bump up your baseline carbs pretty hard out the gates. And some guys will be okay with that, and then some guys they'll be like, no, I need that cheat meal. It's like, okay, then we can keep your baseline carbs pretty low right out the gate. Therefore, you can still afford to have that cheat meal, and it puts us in that same surplus throughout the week.
Great. Okay. So that's all for the cheat meals. So what about the mini cuts? Are you doing it so and how often and what depends on it?
So the mini cut is depending on insulin sensitivity, depending on where body fat levels have gotten to, and then from there depends on appetite as well. At some extent, if a guy's appetite is shot, like I had a men's physique pro, he was about 210 pounds, and he was like I trained with him every single day, and I would see him in the gym, and he is like struggling to get that post-workout meal in. And so for me, I'm gonna ask questions on, dude, is your appetite completely gone? Like, do you not feel hungry anymore? Because the main thing I try to tell people is we want to resensitize that appetite so your body actually wants to, eat the food. You're actually enjoying the food. And obviously, bodybuilding at some point does become less about enjoyment and just about progression. But obviously, if you're not eating the food and you can't eat the food, your digestion is probably not in a great spot either. So my main thing with that is if even if you're lean, if your appetite shot, let's just resensitize for like a week. Let's go ahead and pull your carbohydrates down pretty hard. Let's still have you either in a maintenance calories or a slight surplus, but let's do enough to not lose any weight while bringing the food down. Therefore, we can get ready for another push up. So that's kind of what we did. I'll use him as an example. He was at about 600 carbs. We pulled him down to about 400 carbs, which seems like a pretty drastic drop. But the main thing people forget is he's still in a surplus. Like he was 207. By the end of that mini cut, he was at 205. He lost 2 pounds, but now appetite's back up. Things are ramped up, and now we could push again. And I'll only do that mini cut for a small period of time, maybe 2 to 3 weeks, to get him rolling again.
So this is like the appetite situation, but what about the guys who are just maybe pushed it a little bit too far? Do you like to mini cut them and then start like right back on a plan, or do you think that if it's just too much, it's too much? We need to cut it off like into the like almost shape condition and then just get back at the off season once again.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, but when you have a guy who just maybe just going too far away with just body fat
Yep.
on the off season, do you like to do some sort of
Oh,
mini
okay.
cut and then just go again, or cut it down like almost to the shape condition and then get back to the this podcast is created for you and thanks to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do leave the comment and share this episode for bumping up the algorithm. If you found something valuable for you here and you wanted to support me and this channel while also needing the highest quality peptides and supplements, maybe an awesome sports bag, or just simply wanted to fuel your mind with some good nootropic coffee, please support me by using my discount codes. The links and the codes you can find in the description down below. I also highly encourage you to check out my shop for awesome t-shirts like this, some shakers like this, and for awesome wristbands. Thank you for watching, and let's get back to the content.
So it just depends, right? So my main thing is if I see a guy's body fat has gone way too far, um, it depends on what that athlete needs. Do they need to get on stage from a mental standpoint? Because every athlete's different, right? Some guys like to compete, and my job as a coach is to set you up for success and give you all the tools necessary to be successful. At the end of the day, my job is to provide a service. So, some coaches will be like, just say you have a guy who's way out of shape and he's like, dude, I want to compete. My goal is then let him compete. Like that's what he wants to do. Obviously, my goal is to explain to him, look, dude, you're not going to be competitive at the national level yet, but if you want to go do a regional show, sure, we could do so. So I want to. That's what I'll kind of base it off of, because some coaches will be like, no, man, that guy's not allowed to compete because he's not ready yet. But at the end of the day, if he's paying me for a service, who am I to tell that athlete like, no, you're not allowed to? My job is to explain to them, can you be successful on stage yet? Be 100% transparent and honest. And then they, as grown adults, have to make that decision if that's what they want to do. Good to go?
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. So what I was saying is, so number one thing is kind of dependent on that, on what the athlete wants to do. But then the second thing is if an athlete's giving me full reign, hey, coach, you take the wheel here. You let me know when I'm going to be competitive again. We'll go through a smaller mini cut We'll get their body fat levels down. We'll get them to a really sensitive spot again in terms of insulin sensitivity, and then we'll push back up. I don't like to, diet them back down to stage lean and then push back up. I think there is a right body fat set percentage to get to in order for them to continue to grow and progress in that off season again. So it's kind of like, build up, resensitize, drop some body fat levels off, get you in a visually spot where I can see where we're improving, boom, and start building back up from there.
Yeah. So I just want to ask you to, how do you really assess their insulin sensitivity?
I have them actually prick their fingers every single morning. Any client who I potentially want to use insulin with, or if I think their glucose levels aren't good, I have my clients get a monitor and they'll check their levels fasted and pre-training. My high level athletes do use insulin, but obviously we'll get into PEDs at some point, so we could discuss
Yeah.
that then. So that's my main thing is I'll have guys prick their fingers and check their glucose levels.
So what about like a Down phenomenon? If they are using, for example, GH or something like
Yep.
that, do you count it on the readings in the morning, or do you just like postprandial only, or maybe
I'll,
NYC, because that's probably
I'll,
going to be the more accurate.
Yep, I'll still check it in the mornings, because obviously, you know, GH does blunt insulin sensitivity. So the main thing for me there is to see how much, number one thing is let's start checking your glucose before we add in GH. Let's see how much GH has bumped up your glucose levels, and then from there, that's when you use certain tools to bring that levels back down. Whether berberine, you want to use a GDA, whether you want to use a metformin, whether you want to use insulin. Um, I'm I'm a proponent of, if you are bodybuilding at some point, I think insulin is a very good tool to use just because it will give your pancreas a break rather than, your body's not meant to eat 900 grams of carbohydrates a day at
Yeah.
some point. That's not healthy either.
Okay. Yeah, sorry that I'm asking so deeply, but I know that for US guys, especially Canada and those kind of people, like doing the labs are just a struggle sometimes. So do you like does your guys need to check the N1C and insulin levels, or you just purely looking at the morning fasted and then the maybe postprandial?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously A1C and all that stuff is great, but how often are guys gonna be able to afford labs, that frequently? So for me, obviously when they get their labs drawn. Some athletes very frequently, obviously the ones who could afford to get it frequently, we want to get them as often as possible, to ensure that they're staying as safe and as healthy as possible, from an insulin sensitivity standpoint, but also from a standpoint of overall health markers. But most guys aren't going to get labs every, 2 months. I do have a requirement on my roster. Every 4 months, you have to pull labs, if you want to take PEDs, under the scope of me monitoring things to make sure you're staying as safe and as healthy as possible. But obviously, like I said, so we will monitor mostly based on blood glucose levels. We also will monitor based on, feel,
Oh,
some,
that's true.
there's a lot of factors there. Looking at other labs, that are become very important from cortisol as well. Like there becomes a lot of factors into play to ensure the athlete is, utilizing not just food, but stressors in their life. There's a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah, obviously. So what about the cardio and or steps in the off season? Do you like your guys to utilize it year round?
Yes, all year we're going to do some form of cardio. All year we're going to do some form of steps. I don't care if you're open. I don't care if you're classic. I don't care if you're men's physique. I think, movement is very good to keep digestion and appetite higher. Obviously, I'm not telling guys to do, because the number one objective for me, man, is when I look at every athlete that comes to me is we want to set you up for a successful prep. And by that, I mean, we want to have cardio low in the off season, have steps low in the off season, have food high in the off season, have drugs from fat burners out in the off season. Therefore, when we start a prep phase, we can make it a seemingly process to make that weight drop easy. Like we want it to be as smooth and as efficient as possible. And I'll use, Andy as an example again, just because people know him. He's 9 weeks out from the New York Pro. He's probably has about 8 pounds to lose of body fat. He's on 20 minutes of cardio 5 times a week, and he's still eating 400 grams of carbs on his low days. But that's when you nail a perfect reverse and you set yourself up perfectly for a prep. You probably won't get over 20 minutes of cardio his whole preparation, and
Yeah.
people will then be like, well, he's gifted, he's blessed, that's why he gets to do that. Well, before he worked with me, he was that guy who did 2 hours of cardio a day. He was that guy had to smash in T3 and T4 to ensure his metabolic rate was good. But when different methodologies come into play, understanding an athlete, understanding their body, understanding why they work a certain way, understanding what makes them mentally tick, understanding how to put this athlete in the best position to become the best version of themselves, it doesn't always come down to bodybuilding. It doesn't always come down to X's and O's. Sometimes it comes down to me mentally understanding that human being, me understanding what that person needs from a feedback standpoint to get them confident, to get them to want to work for me as an athlete. So there's a lot of factors there. It doesn't always come down to, basic eat this, take this, do this. Like there's so much more.
Yeah, definitely. And as you said, like like previously about the future of habits, if you want to be a good bodybuilder, you just need to practice those habits and keep they as constant as possible throughout the whole off season and prep. If you are treating your off season like a prep, trust me, you are going to be blessed as well. Because if, especially if you are not like gifted like Phil Heath or those kind of guys, you need to nail everything to the T to make sure you are not leaving any stone unturned. Because in a case that someone, just like you said before, like not eating their meals, like skipping on their cardio, maybe just forgetting to pee, like overeat too frequently and stuff like that, and they're just asking you about why we are not making the progress like X like competitor, just
Yep.
because you're slapping on the basics, and those guys are not. And I
100%,
liked
man.
when Dom Superstars one time says that if you are just like if you're not eating one single meal, the clock turn turn off and starts again. So you cannot say you are like nailed
Especially
it if you just leave a one meal on the table and not
course,
eat it.
man, because you don't stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Now you're combining two meals. Now your digestion, you can't even digest that much food at once.
Yeah.
Your body's now in not in even a state to eat. I'll even have guys monitor their heart rate post-workout before they get their meal in. Ensure that your heart rate comes down so you could actually digest the food because what happens during training. Your heart rate goes up. What is your body's number one objective? Is to, you're pumping blood into the muscle. If you eat too close to training, what happens? Your body's now focused on digesting the food. How are you going to pump blood into the muscle if your body's pumping blood to the pancreas to get that to secrete, insulin to be able to utilize that food? So that's why I tell people, man, like the small things are what add up to big wins.
Mhm.
Like, can you nail a consistent meal plan for a year just eating 5 meals a day? Then can you, make sure you don't miss a pin? Then can you ensure you nail your reverse diet phases? And everybody's nailing looks different. I'm not like, for example, like Andy on my team, he's a machine. Like, I don't expect any of my athletes to become him. I don't expect anybody on my team to even reverse like him. He's been doing this since he's 16 years old. But I always tell guys, the one thing can you guys promise me is you'll be better than last time. That is a win in my books. You were
Mhm.
better than your last time. Last time you gained 30 pounds post show. This time, can we keep it to 12? Like, and people want to be like, well, he still gained a lot. And it's like, but guys, it's still progression. Bodybuilding is
Mhm.
all about progression. When you try to get guys from being 50% to 100%, that's a hard, ask. Can you get guys to go from 50 to 70, 70 to 80, 80 to 90? Like those small jumps, eventually you build that athlete into being the best athlete he could be.
Okay, so let's start to talk about the things that really matters, because we all know that diet training, that's who cares? The
Okay.
PEDs, the PEDs. So, how about the PEDs in the off season? What are the best compounds for building mass in the off season, in your opinion, or maybe in like your experience, or
Yep.
what would be the best stack that you would prefer to utilize if possible? Because we all know that there are going to be guys who are just not like certain compounds because of this or that, but like having the perfect client as I am, you can use whatever you wanted to. So what would be the perfect cocktail in your opinion?
So, like I said, in the off season, it all comes down to total milligrams, in my opinion, right? So I just want total milligrams at a certain point. So, the number one thing assess with every client is what have you used before? How much have you used before? Where can we still get a response? Because if I always say, get the most from the least. I actually am a proponent of titrating up cycles in the off season. Maybe we start with a total milligram dosage of 600 milligrams to start the first 4 weeks, get things kicking in. I'll actually start the off season with an oral, just because the oral will metabolize a little bit faster, therefore it kicks in while the cycle still takes some time to build up into your system. Um, Main compounds recently, man, I've been using is obviously testosterone is your base. I love to use a Masteron. Obviously, if your testosterone levels are high, then you want to make sure you bring down your estrogen. I don't like to use a lot of AI in the off season, anti-estrogen, so I like to mitigate that with other compounds. Mast, Primo, EQ could do that for you. But also you don't want to crash estrogen either. So it comes down to having a fine balance because, obviously very neuroprotective. You need estrogen there to build tissue as well. And then everybody aromatizes different. Some guys feel great on 100, nanograms per deciliter of estrogen. Some guys feel terrible on it, where you have to drop them back down. But yeah, my main compounds test, mast, primo in the off season. If it's a younger individual who's just starting their bodybuilding journey, I've used MPP, I've used DECA, I've used Equipoise as well. I just think, man, for me personally, just doing stuff with the test mast and primo combo has just worked great, and it makes it nice for me because it doesn't blur the lines, so I'm able to see the physique. Able to still see a clean physique. I'm still able to see a lean physique. I'm able to see a physique that's not have a lot of fluid retention on it, where it's now blurring my lines and making me it's hurting my understanding of, is this athlete gaining body fat or is that just a lot of fluid sitting on their physique because of compound choice? So yeah, those are my three go-to in the off season: a test mass primo combo. I will add an MPP or a DECA if joints are starting to get a little beat up, just from a lubrication standpoint. I used to be a proponent of a test DECA and mass combo, but I've kind of gone away from that over the last year.
Mhm. Do you really find like Masteron like lowering the estradiol? Because to be honest, I've never seen that on the labs, and I've know that it definitely could to the point control the effects of the estrogen, just because this is gonna be like the estrogen receptor like. I don't know how to say it in English, but they are like
Yep.
almost fighting for the
Yep.
receptor. So that's gonna be
Oh,
like it is not working as like a serum, like
yep.
but it's this kind of it's there's actually a great coach from Poland, Luki. Maybe guys from Professional Muscle know him. He made a great article about the Masteron and Primabol, and I actually trying myself and never seen like any like estradiol suppressed effect from the
Yep.
Masteron.
You
So
won't necessarily see a huge suppression, but I have seen some labs drop down with it in. But that's where everybody's so different, right? And that's what makes
yeah, yeah.
bodybuilding so fun because everybody's response to drugs is so different. Like that's what fascinates me about bodybuilding. Like even sometimes you'll look at things, on studies and X, Y, and Z, and this is how a human body is supposed to work mechanically and metabolically, and then you start working with an athlete, and you're like, dude, everything I learned is now thrown out the window. Like this is complete. We're gonna take a completely different approach with this. That's also why you have an understanding with an athlete. Just say he's on a test, master on a printable, and it's not mitigating his E2 levels enough. Now you have an understanding with that athlete of that's not working for him from a aromatization standpoint of dropping those levels. So now maybe we pull out the Masteron and maybe I do throw in an equipoise there to try to bring those levels down by a certain amount. That's where plug and play, trying different versions, methodologies with every athlete to understand what works best for them. And that's why there is no one size fits all for anybody on my team. Like if you look at everybody's cycles, even on prep, it's different based on what the athlete needs and what my understanding I built with that athlete of how their body
Mhm.
aromatizes. Some guys aromatize more on 400 tests than a guy on 900. For example, I'll use myself as an example. When I take testosterone and my estradiol shoots up, the crazy thing for me is I don't even feel no side effects of being at 200. My estrogen could be at 200 and I don't feel no side effects. But that's where every athlete's so different from a variability standpoint.
Yeah, of course. But can you just, before we just delve into
Yep.
some milligrams per kilograms or however those coaches like to count it up, would you like to share your opinion about using AIs, or maybe how do you structure your PDS protocol? Because you tell me that the compounds will be, for example, like test mass primal, but how much test in relevance to the DHT derivatives? Because we all saw those coaches who are using like 150 mg of test and 2.5 thousand milligrams of DHT or something like that.
So I'm actually I've never ran testosterone in off season. I think testosterone is a phenomenal choice to use. I think another main thing to remember in the off season is milligrams per milliliter. You know,
Yeah.
total pinning volume. I don't want guys putting a lot of volume in because on prep we don't really have a choice depending on compound choice and use. Um, so I think the main thing for an off season is when we're talking about total milligrams, of use. It's it's so hard with the estradiol, man, and the AI using it. Number one thing is the reason I don't like to use it is it's kind of ruin labs to a certain extent. It's gonna ruin your lipids. It's gonna mess some stuff up. So my main thing is if we have to use it for an athlete, I'm not going to sit here and say we won't use it at all. My preference is to not use it though, is to use other compounds to mitigate estradiol. But then again, you also got to remember, and I tell people this all the time. Everybody's so different. Some client could be at, just say a client functions off a base range of 100, on their E2 labs. So you look at that and you go, well, what's your side effects? How do you feel? Do you feel fine on it? Like, are you growing well still? Are you not showing a sign of holding a film of fluid? Well, then that's great. If you start to feel the side effects now as a coach, I have to go into a mode of how do I fix that issue in the best manner possible for that athlete. Like if that client does not want to take EQ from an anxiety standpoint, then I need to figure out, what to do within that cycle setup to change it to make them feel better. Whether that's dropping down testosterone because they're aromatizing too much and now bumping up DHT, awesome. Okay, this client's feeling fine on a high level of testosterone, then I don't have to do that. But it's so person dependent.
Yeah. So, but are you talking about ultra sensitive E2 tests? Because those
Yep.
okay, okay, yeah. Because sometimes I see those guys who are just pulling the like regular ones, and
No, no, because
then
that's going to
other
get skewed as
compounds,
well.
yeah, other compounds just go interact with that, and they are based on that. But what about the guys, for example, who just highly aromatize? So, for example, he used like 350 mg of test,
Yep.
1,000 mg of masteron, and on the old ultra sensitivity test of E2, he's on like 90 or 100, and his blood pressure is like elevated, and his face is red, and he has like oily skin and all of the symptoms of high estrogen. What about those guys? Do you think that they just simply needs to use an NI, or would you like to? Yeah, okay. Because
At that point,
yeah,
his
yeah,
testosterone levels are so low, like that is something we want to use, right? Because you look at that athlete and that is what he specifically needs. So he pulls the ultra sensitive estradiol, he's at 90, he's not feeling good, oily skin, libido's gone, mentally doesn't feel good. Like all those factors come into play. And now it's like at some point I'm not going to keep changing cycle design just for the sake of not using AI. There's a time and a place for everything. So that's why as a bodybuilding coach, I'm not against anything. I'm not
yeah.
against any approach because you have to be able to shift, change methodologies, all these things based on the given athlete.
Yeah, I've asked because there are coaches. Sometimes I invite coaches and they are talking about the obviously perfect scenario. So maybe that's the
Yep.
reason. But most of the guys I work with can't just simply use DHT and just be okay with their
Yep.
labs. Just it's almost like I would say like over 10 people, probably seven would have to use AI if they wanted to
Yep.
run higher than 300 weeks of tests, to be honest.
Yep.
So, and you've all in all podcasts nowadays, they are just shitting on the AI like they are the worst enemies of the human population almost
Yeah, for
like they
sure.
are
And I think
causing everything like yeah.
that's why I feel like a lot of, people have to start to take everything with a grain of salt. Like it's like being against it's like, when people say like this is my coaching philosophy, it's all about adapting and changing and learning as the times go on. The number one objective as a coach should always be to keep your athlete as safe and as healthy as possible within the sport. And the way you do that is obviously by performing your job to the best of your ability. But I think the way you also do that is not being totally against anything. As coaches, you can't just have concrete like, no, I'm not doing that. Because at times you might get a curveball thrown at you where you have to do something where you're not super happy about doing it, but in order to make sure the athlete becomes the best version of themselves, you have to do that. And that
Yeah.
is okay. So it's like one of those things where coaching is more than just knowledge, information, giving a PD protocol. It's psychological, it's mental. There's so much more that goes into it of feeding into making an athlete the best version of themselves.
Yeah, this is why if someone asks me if I am high or low PED user, I've always said both.
Yep.
Because it depends. If you need 5 grams, I don't care. This is not my health. If you are willing to do that and you want it to be the best, and that's really how much you need it, I don't care. This is like your decision. You are a grown man, and
Yep.
I can help you if you wanted to. If you know all the risk that's involved
Yep.
with the bodybuilding, you should be like grown enough working with me to make that decision. And if you need to use 5 gram, you're gonna use it.
Because we also got to remember, right, with all these coaches, they're like, well, that athlete, like, I'm not going to help them because they're trying to take too much. And it's like, well, you should help them as a coach. And the reason I say so is because number one thing, from 5 grams, you could probably get them to, agree to just take three. And then you monitor their labs. You make sure they stay as healthy as possible while they understand the risk. Chances are, if you don't help that athlete, he's going to go take 6 grams by himself now. And then
Yeah.
he's just going to hurt himself even more. So our job as coaches isn't to babysit, it's to help them understand the parameters, the risks involved, um, telling them their true genetic potential. Like, dude, I've had guys come to me and they're like, you think if I take more gear, I could look like this guy? And I'll just be 100% honest with them. And like, dude, look, you're never going to look like that guy. You need to focus on being the best version of you.
Yeah.
I can't promise you're going to become an Olympian. I can't promise you're going to turn pro. I can't promise you'll even win a regional overall. But the one thing I can promise is we will do everything in our power to make sure you are the best version of yourself. And that is all I can promise as a coach. Like I
Yeah.
can't promise wins, losses, none of that stuff. And my goal is what I'll tell them, my goal is to promise you I'll try to keep you as safe and as healthy as possible while doing this process. Because, there is a life after bodybuilding. A lot of these guys have kids, a family. Like I don't want you just chipping away years at your life for something that's unobtainable, because some coaches will sell people on a dream. Like, dude, you have so much potential, I'll take you to Olympia. And you can't say that anymore, because the talent pool in bodybuilding is so high now. Like, I I don't even know which guys, I'm sure a lot of Olympians this year are worried about making it back there because of the new rule change of like, there's only gonna be 40 guys there. Can I even make it back?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what's funny? Those athletes who are thinking that you are holding them back just because I don't know what. If if they are on your roster, you want them to be the best as they can because they are just your like living commercial. So
100%, man.
why you would holding them back?
Of
This
course.
is
And I always
crazy.
tell athletes that where athletes are like, well, I feel like you're not letting me take enough, or you're not letting me do this because you don't want to see me become the best version of myself. And I'm like, guys, we have to all remember I have a business to run here. I want you to look crazy on stage. I want you to win every show. Like if I could have all my pros win every show they ever go to, I'd love for that to happen. But I'm also very honest and realistic, you know. I had a pro compete last weekend and the judges told us it was a 50-50 split decision and it was kind of like apples and oranges, right? What you choose. And I can always respect that from a standpoint. Of course, I want my guy to win, but I'll always go up to the other guy and shake his hand and be like, dude, you had a phenomenal physique as well, man. Congratulations to you. Because, like I said, we don't control that. But, like, as an athlete, you should never feel like I don't want you to win. But I can still be respectful to the other people in the sport, other coaches. And, like, at the end of the day, we're all trying to win. So, as an athlete, you should never feel like, why are you not helping me get there? Because it only benefits me to get them there.
Yeah, of course, of course. So just continue on the topic of the PEDs in the off season. What do you think about the GH in the off season? Do you believe that more is more, or you are more on the fence that's like maybe keep it a little bit lower because of, I don't know, like thickening of the skin or something like that?
So I think GH is a great proponent. I use it in the off season with a lot of athletes. Dosage will depend on level, what level of athlete you are. The dosage will also depend on quality of GH. You know, a lot of guys using generics, you do see a pretty big fluid retention there. I've noticed with guys who are using prescription GH, super high quality, you don't see that much of a fluid gain. So it kind of depends on number one, quality of GH you have. Number two, depends on level of athlete. And then number three, it kind of depends on what is this athlete's strong suit. You know, if it's a guy who's naturally a little bit flatter, less round, less full, okay, we could add in some GH there to, you know, utilize that to help his physique. If there's a guy who's already super round, bubbly, we might not need as high of a dose. It kind of just depends for me on the athlete.
So let's say we're talking about me. And first of all, I just forget about asking you, how much do you think, like on average, a guy who would wanted to jump over the weight class, like milligram wise per week, would need? I'm asking just because there is a threshold that's almost like all of the competitors are in like the range, like they
Yep.
are just shipping. So what do you think the range is? And then me being like a rather flat guy, like I am not like a Clarita like
Bubbly.
bubbly dude. So I've run as high as 20 AUs a day
Yep.
for a short period of time, but I have no problem with like with my glycemia or anything like that because I've managed everything pretty well. So what will you like to? I've year round I using 10 I use. So
Okay.
that's like a standard dose for me. Like never came off that.
Yep. So personally for myself, the max I've ever used with a client is six IUs. I don't like to push over that just from, like I said, an NC sensitivity standpoint, because it will start to blunt your obviously your glucose levels at some extent. So the max I've ever used is six. But you being naturally a flatter guy, you know, can we utilize other compounds now to mitigate that insensitivity? Can to bring that back up in a positive manner. So that's kind of where that will go for me. But even with total milligrams, man, it's so hard to put a concrete number on it. Um, I will say I've never pushed an athlete over 2 grams myself personally as a coach. I'm a big believer in less is more, but some athletes do have to push it. You know, and me and Andy were pretty honest on the last podcast I did. Like, I'll actually just pull it up right now so I don't butcher any numbers. But his post Olympia push got his blood work back. It was perfect. He ran, you know, 900 tests, 300 primo, 600 mast, Lantis, GH fast in the morning. So he ran about 1.8 grams of total gear. And that's an Olympian, you know, who's won multiple shows. So, sure, can you push past that as an amateur? Yeah, but then it comes down to, do you really have the genetic tools to even make it to the furthest stage of bodybuilding? And that's where I'll have that honest conversation with the client of like, look, dude, this is not a PED problem. This is a, you know, we're just genetically inferior to some of these guys. Like, for example, you know, you look at a guy like One Punch who's at the Olympia. Like, I don't care how many PEDs you take, your waistline's not going to become as small as his. He has no waist. You know, so that's where the genetic variability comes into play, and then you help people understand the risk. But I would say, you know, for an amateur trying to push into the super heavies class, obviously, the more PEDs doesn't necessarily always mean the better, But it can be for some guys where you can take more and you are going to grow more. I mean, at the end of the day, you're putting synthetic hormones into your body to
Yeah.
increase muscle protein synthesis and increase recovery rate, all these things to ensure you become better. So I mean, take it with a grain of salt. But for myself with an amateur trying to push on to the next level, I would say about 1.6 to 1.8 grams of gear, if they are, pretty genetically adequate to make it to the next
Yeah.
level. Anything past that, I'm just gonna help them explain, like, look, dude, you probably weren't meant to be this big because the guys who are normally big are able to get away with less and still get big. And I know a lot of people don't believe that, they're like, no, I guarantee he's taking more, but it's like, dude, these some guys are just genetic phenomenons. Like like for example, I have a men's physique guy right now. He's gonna compete and he's too big for the division and he's on 200 milligrams of testosterone, and like because he's too big for the division and you start adding in gear and he just grows too much and then he's outgrown the division. And I'm sure there's some bodybuilders and classic guys like that who have to take, small doses. Otherwise, they will outgrow the division.
Yeah. You know what's funny? Recently I found my old like journey on the True Bodybuilding forum. If anyone wants to hop in, just hop in there. And if I've used almost 3 grams of gear, being I don't even remember, but like 85 kilos, something like that, with my like first coach. And right now, when I'm looking at it, because that was just like,
Yep.
I don't know, like 6, 7, 8 years ago, I think that is crazy because uh, like the last time I've stepped in on a stage in the off season with Luki,
Yep.
we are not. I don't want it to lie, but I don't believe we go higher than maybe 16 to 1800 maximum. Like,
Yep.
and that was like a peak off season.
Yeah.
I believe so. I don't believe that guys needs to go as high as they think.
Yep.
I do believe though that people can't use drugs properly. Like they pin it, but they fuck up with everything else, like sleep management.
100%.
Like I was severe sleep apnea to the
Yep.
point that I was sleeping in a bank. Like I've talked with a guy in sitting in a bank, and I
Yep.
fall asleep.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, just during the conversation. So
Yep.
I was, and no one's care. No one's
Well,
care.
that's the main thing, right? Is a lot of these guys will be like, how much drugs do I need to push to become an Olympian or to become a pro? And it's like, well, have you nailed your diet? Do you get proper sleep? Do you have proper recovery? Do you take all the health supplements needed to stay as healthy as possible to be able to even take the gear? Do you actually know how to train properly from a mechanic standpoint, but also from an intensity standpoint? A lot of times I'll realize guys now are either married to the mechanic side of things or they're all out intensity. I always tell guys, why can't we just mix the two? Why can't we have great intensity and great form and mechanics? And those things are going to yield growth. So I always tell clients before they jump on a cycle or, if they want to push, like, can we nail the other variables week in and week out? If we can, dude, you're going to make tremendous progress. Whether you become a pro and an Olympian or not, you're going to build a sick physique at the end of this. You're going to be very happy with your progression. But if you're going to be the guy who's 50% on anything else, but 100% on just the drugs aren't some magic pill that you're just going to become an Olympian tomorrow. And I think that's what the fad with PEDs is like a lot of these people just thinks you pin and all of a sudden you
Yeah.
gain 30 pounds of muscle. And it's like, if that was the case, guys, we'd have Olympians walking around everywhere. But people are now too focused on the wrong things rather than being focused on just the whole picture because it's more than just it's not even just like PEDs and all these things. It's like, dude, how is your mental health? Are you even in a maturation state mentally to be able to take these drugs to be able to progress your physique and still have a good balance in your life overall because we do see at times the PEDs will ruin your mental health and they can create a pretty big impact on your life overall.
Yeah, definitely. So you've mentioned a couple of times insulin in the off season. Are you a huge advocate of using insulin? But I let's just put it into perspective. Do you believe that this is only for glucose management, or do you believe that it is a tool to utilize to build some quality tissue as well?
Think it could be used for both. But when the way I use insulin personally, right, is do I use it a lot? No. Do I use it with high level athletes who need it? Yes. Um, I think with insulin, it's to ensure that you are insulin sensitive. For example, with some athletes will use Lantus if their glucose is blunted. At some point in the off season, your glucose is going to start getting blunted. Let's be real. You can't have perfect glucose all off season, especially if you're eating a bunch of carbohydrates to ensure performance stays high. So you add it in. I don't add an insulin. I don't have an athlete start taking insulin and then start adding food. No, no, I don't do that. What I do is can the in is their food totals at 700 carbs. Can we use now insulin to help with that mechanism of partitioning those nutrients better? So if I do think we can, then I'll add in Lantus in the morning. And then I can add in some Humalog or fast-acting insulin pre-training if needed, depending on where the glucose is before their pre-training meal. I think the Lantus is just going to be spread throughout the day. It's just going to give your pancreas a little break. And then pre-training, if it's a big carbohydrate meal, we could go ahead and utilize some insulin to shuttle some nutrients. But I'll never just, I know some people are proponent of, well, we're going to start using insulin, therefore we're going to start bumping up the food. I won't use those in a combination. I have a set diet and then realize and ask myself, can we use insulin here to make that diet more effective for this athlete?
Great. So, do you prefer to first of all put it into a pre-workout meal or post-workout meal or both, if
I
possible?
actually prefer to use Lantus
Okay.
as my first
Basil.
choice. Yep, I like to use a basal insulin as a first choice to spread throughout the day, just to give a little bit of partitioning throughout the day, give the pancreas a break, and then I'll start to add it pre-workout after that. Post-workout is usually my last ad. Only reason I say that is because most of the time, you should be pretty insulin sensitive post-workout. You just burn through some glycogen, depleted during training, and then from there, your levels should be pretty good, especially if you get yourself to a state of getting your heart rate down and all that good stuff.
So, let's talk about the blood pressure for a little bit. Do you like to utilize like a telmisartan or something like that, like
I like
certain
to use ARB.
ARBs or
Yep.
yeah, yeah, or maybe like a beta blockers or something like that, but only like you tell just right now that you like to use it, but only if the guys have a problem or to prevent the problem. For example, like
I'll use
because
it as a preventive measure.
okay.
Yep.
So, for example, you started out with for like a 20 mix, and then if needed, you bump it up
Yep.
or
To
like
40.
switch
Yep.
it to okay.
So the main thing for me with the ARB usage is I think it's more beneficial outside of even just blood pressure, right? Like
Okay. So,
obviously blood pressure is something that we want to monitor as bodybuilders and ensuring the athletes stay as healthy as possible. But it also just depends, on certain supplements you use outside of ARB. Because like I said, telomethrin, you just mentioned, I do like to utilize that. You can start off at 20, you can bump it to 40, you can bump it to 60, depending on the response you're seeing, depending on what the athlete needs. And then, you can use baby aspirin, thin the blood, whatever the case may be. But it's all dependent on blood work as well, right? You get back post, just right post show. You start to notice what are their main issues after taking a cycle. Okay, these are their main issues for their next phase. We need to add in these supplements as a preventative measure because when they are on cycle, these are the issues that are arising.
okay, great. So we are now living in the area of using like utilized peptides like almost blindly. So,
Yep.
do you like to use some sort of peptides during the off season, or you even experience that some are really useful, or do you think that is just it is not a necessity, and maybe if the athletes are sponsored or something like that?
I think everything has a time and place in bodybuilding. I think the problem with people is when something new comes out, they're like kids at a candy store and they want to take it all, they want to use everything. I like to number one understand the mechanism of what the tool is doing for us and then I like to utilize it if it's needed. Um, my main thing is that the compounds I've used peptide wise mainly as MOTS. I've used Retta. I think Retta is a very useful tool. I'm not a huge proponent of it.
Oh, you're back.
Yeah,
Okay,
my
great.
Zoom crashed. Um, but like I was saying, I like to use Retta, but I only like to use Retta, not necessarily just for the appetite benefit side of things. I think as bodybuilders, we do need to have some mental strength to be able to fight off, food cravings and stuff like that in a preparation state, especially if you want to be the best in the
Yeah,
world.
but just I just wanted to like lead you that we are talking about the off season. So let's talk. You use Reda in the off season as well, or
So no, so Retta, I'll use in only in a when they're reversing out into an off season, just for an appetite standpoint,
yeah,
if need be, just to clear out some food noise. So obviously, hunger is going to be pretty high from the greptin and ghrelin and leptin, as we had talked about. So I'll use a little bit of Retta. I haven't used it honestly very frequently because I like to keep hunger high, and I do want biofeedback on where hunger is at and appetite is at. Mod I've used in the off season. And honestly, to be real with you, man, those are the main two that I'll use in the off season. Outside of that, I'm not a huge peptide guy. Like we had talked about, I think people go overkill on a lot of this stuff. I think obviously, BPC and TB have been around forever. They're phenomenal for injuries, inflammation,
yeah.
all that good stuff. But those are like the main four that I'll use in off season.
Great, great. So I don't know. I'm not sure if you're sponsored by any companies or something like that. If you are, all codes are gonna be down below, so you can just tell us about your supplement staples year round when it comes to the health management, of course,
Yep.
because like we are not talking about creatine or something like that because that's obvious.
Of course, yeah. So my staples, from a health standpoint, high quality multi, K2D3, Magless, before bed, omega threes, high quality, astragalus, NAC, TUDCA, nattokinase. I really like metformin, curcumin. Um, and I'm personally not sponsored by any companies, and the reason I'm not is because I always joke with my athletes. They're always like, man, you got to link up with the company and you got to plug yourself. But I like to honestly put my athletes' codes into plans. I want them to get a benefit from that. I want them to become athletes, become sponsored, get code usage. Therefore, they could progress their careers. I'm just trying to coach. I'm not trying to be an influencer.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to, become a famous athlete who's sponsored.
Okay,
Can
you're
you hear
back.
me
You're back.
still?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Yep. Yep. So the main brands I like to use are going to be Ron Revive. I like to use Leviathan Nutrition. Pure Factor is great. Anything that's high quality, man, I want my people to take. Obviously, if an athlete joins the team and I don't believe in the quality of it, I'm not going to put their code into the bio because, or into their plans because I don't believe in that product. Because my number one thing with bodybuilding coaching is full transparency and honesty and just recommending high quality stuff to people. But those are some supplements I like for my athletes to take. Sometimes you get a blend of products into one. I always tell athletes, just read the label. Just make sure
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I am not up to those blends to be honest, because either they are really poor and like this if you can take like two capsules and there's like 16 ingredients out there,
Yep.
someone is lying here, or you're just not reading the labels. And if
100%.
there are really good ones, the amount of capsules
Yep.
and sheets are really bizarre. Some athletes I don't like to use that much. And to be honest, I don't like them because you can actually dose it properly. Because if you see, for example,
Yep.
that you need to bump it up some certain like
Yep.
subs, it's really hard to do that. But
Yeah, like
yeah,
some blends you'll get is like 300 milligrams of TUDCA, and I'm like, well, I want you taking 2 grams of that. So what are you going to take? Or like
yeah,
7, 8 pills of that, or 10 pills of that? So I always tell athletes, I'm like, please pay attention to the label, see the milligrams, and I'll even tell athletes, just send me what you think about getting, and I'll just tell you, like, look, that's not beneficial for you. You're just wasting your money.
Yeah, or using like a barks rather than extracts and stuff like that. We've all seen that. Yeah. So, Prab, thank you so much for your time because we are just finished up. I believe that the off-season talk, and we are talking for almost like I believe about half, 1.5 hour or 1 hour 30 minutes. So I am totally gonna free you up because you have your life and we are totally appreciate that you take your time from your life to just share some knowledge with us today. And obviously, if possible, I would really love to invite you for the second part. Then we're going to talk about transition into the contest prep, then the contest prep, and what to do after, because I
Yeah.
believe that there is a huge gap in understanding how to set up properly the post-show plan, not only for like the diet training and stuff, but also mentally. Because if you just lose those carrots in front of you, some guys are feeling really, really lost, and sometimes it's go south really easily. So thank you once again for your time. And if anyone just stay with us to the end of this podcast, just please leave a thumb up in the comments down below, share this anywhere you can, and just stay with us for more because just we are not gonna stop with the single one. Trust me, I'm gonna shoot prop like 15 messages daily. Just no, just kidding. But if you are up to, we are definitely wanted to do
Of
the
course.
second part. So thank you once again, and have a great day, man.
Yeah, man. I appreciate your time, brother. I appreciate you having me on. For anybody who watches this on YouTube, for my side of things, like, comment, subscribe, guys. He's obviously doing a lot of positive information here, giving out free game to you guys for some people, who aren't fortunate enough to afford coaching. This is great information for you guys to utilize into your own plans. My DMs are always open to help anybody. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to sign up for coaching. I'm always willing to give out knowledge, information to make bodybuilding a safer, healthier, and a better space for everybody. But like I said, man, thank you for having me on. I enjoyed the talk. I always enjoyed talking bodybuilding. Whatever you guys need from me, that you want to discuss, even if you want to jump into at any point, specific peak weeks, when Andy's competing or these guys are competing, I'm always willing to give out information. I don't mind. I don't think there's any secrets to this. We all know the same information. We just apply it differently.
Yeah, definitely. All the infos that like that people can find you are gonna be in the description down below for sure. So if anyone's just not following you yet,
Yep.
they are probably need to start.
I appreciate that,
Thank
man. Yeah, man. I appreciate that.
yeah, thank you, man, and have a great day. See you later.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you.